Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where everyone is calling in from. I am super excited to be here to host the second session of Salesforce Architects in the Making, or SAIMA for short. My name is Diana Hull, and I'll be introducing myself shortly, but I just want to let you know kind of the idea for today is that our session's going to be about an hour. We have two different presentations that we'll be having that will take about 20 minutes each. And then we will be hosting on YouTube after. We might not have quite time for questions during the live webinar, but we really want to hear your feedback and comments on the YouTube posting, and we will make sure to respond to any questions, comments. This is our second time meeting for our study group, so we would really like to hear like what changes we could make or any kind of critique that you feel comfortable making. So I just want to give a few introductions to myself and our speakers. I'm your host, Diana Hull, and I live in Seattle, Washington, where I work as a senior program manager for T-Mobile. And I have been working with the Salesforce platform for close to 8 years. I started as an end user. Originally, I was in direct marketing, so working with pulling customer data lists. But eventually I became interested in learning about all things Salesforce. I think one of the things I really loved, because I just like getting badges, is Trailhead. So I became engaged in Trailhead and then just started learning more and more about the community. I'm currently studying for the Data Architecture and Management Design certification, and I'm super excited to be on this path to CTA. I think a couple years ago, if you'd mentioned that this is where I'd be now, I probably wouldn't even have believed it, but all things are possible. I think one of the things about Salesforce is it's really built up a global community. As we can see here, since I'm posting a little webinar that's people from all over the world can join. And it's not just that there's that community, but it's the willingness for everyone to share their experiences, to share their feedback, to help people become engaged in Salesforce and to ask questions. And when I was starting to look more into that CTA, process, I wanted to find a study group that would help me become better, because sometimes working for a company, you have one experience, but Salesforce, there's so much customization, there's so many things that you can do with it. You really need to start getting out there and talking to other people who have worked with different instances to get their experience too. So that's why I'm here. That's how I'm hosting today's study session. So like I said, we have two different topics that will be covered. Each topic's going to be about 20 minutes. And we'll wait for questions and feedback for once we post the webinar, just because we probably won't have time today since we want the webinar to take about an hour. So I want to go through, introduce our speakers. I have a couple more slides after that, and then I will turn it over to Kiran, who's going to be our first speaker. So our presenter, Kiran, is a calm, composed, and enthusiastic professional who's been working with the Salesforce ecosystem for close to 5 years and has held a variety of different roles, the most recent being a developer support engineer in Salesforce India. Kiran started off as an administrator, but because he loved coding, he started getting more involved in that development path, and he's been since blazing trails. He hails from Chennai, which is a coastal city in India, famous for beaches, music, and I had to listen to this on Google pronunciation last night, so I might not get it right. The demigod Rajnikant and the cricket team CSK. Oops. And one of Kiran's favorite quotes is, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn." And he will be helping us all to learn by talking about Apex Managed Sharing today. Our second speaker is Giuseppe. He joined the tech industry and Salesforce ecosystem in 2016 after an 11-year career in energy trading. He's passionate about data analytics and visualization, process automation, integrations, and software engineering. And he's now on his journey to CTA, well on his journey. Fun trivia fact about Giuseppe is he is the first accredited consultant worldwide for the Einstein Discovery and Einstein Analytics, 15 times Salesforce certified, and 5-time Ranger. He loves Trailhead even more than I do, with 17 super badges, and a community group leader, a Lucania Switzerland admin group. In November of 2019, he had the opportunity to present one of his integration projects and the new architect track of Dreamforce. Today's presentation on Scalable Salesforce Integration is a shorter and revised version of that one. Giuseppe is currently the group IT manager of Architect Group, a Swiss manufacturing group specializing in watchmaking and jewelry precision, high-tech, and med-tech industries. So welcome both of them today to present. I have a couple more slides, but then I'll turn it over to Kiran to get started. I know we're very excited about Apex sharing rules. So, today what we want to achieve is we want to have a supporting environment to help people attain the technical architect certification. And we want to create content that we can help and bring in people's different opinions or ideas about how they've done things so we can facilitate this learning. We want to work on facilitating small study groups to make room for discussion-based learning. So that's something we're still working on and would love to get your feedback, when we post this of how, what would work for you or how can we, try to make that happen. And if you have any more ideas of what we could do, please let us know. We really want to hear back from you. We're so thankful that you guys have joined us from all over the world, and really look forward to hearing about what you think and what we can do better. Um, a couple housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself. We want to make sure that when our presenters are speaking that they are not getting interrupted. And, if we make a mistake, this is a safe spot for learning. So, if there's a mistake, let us know. We're not saying that this is there could happen. And if anybody is interested in presenting or hosting, please reach out. Trust me, everybody is welcome. That's how I'm here. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kiran in a moment.
Hello.
I'm making you the host. You are about to be the host, Kiran.
Sure. Yep. Thanks a lot, Diana, for the wonderful introduction. And to be honest, you pronounced Rajinikanth quite well.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining this session. And today we will start with sharing the records using Apex. So we will talk about the use cases and approach. So let me share my screen. So I believe my screen is visible.
Yeah.
Right. So why Apex managed sharing? Salesforce platform provides a lot of rules, a lot of opportunities to share records. Say we have OWD, which provides the baseline of access for all the objects. On top of it, we can extend the sharing in multiple ways, be it a role hierarchy, be it a sharing rules, we can have criteria or the ownership based sharing rules, or we can have manual sharing as well. So where Apex managed sharing comes into picture. So consider this, we want to share not only the records that we are trying to have in the context, but also the related records. So if you think about the declarative features that we have in hand, this particular use case cannot be covered by any of the available declarative features, and we may have to go for the Apex managed sharing. And consider we have an org which is having lots of records, and the declarative sharing is not performing up to the mark, then we can take a look at Apex managed sharing. Or in very rare cases, we may have some external applications as well which will drive the record access. Say we have an external application which will have a say on how to share a record with which set of users. If an external application is kind of a deciding authority as far as sharing is concerned, then we may have to integrate it with Salesforce and create the share records through Apex. So these are all some of the common use cases where Apex managed sharing will be very useful. And to get started with the concept, we'll talk about the share object first. So every object in Salesforce, be it a standard object or a custom object, will have the underlying share object, provided the OWD of the object is not public read write and it is not on the detail side of a master detail relationship. So consider if you open the developer console or workbench and you are using a query like select ID from invoice share, and you are getting an error like invoice share is not a supported object or invoice share is not visible. So the first place to check is the OWD, obviously, because if the OWD of any object is public read write, which means we have provided the most permissive access to that object, which means every user in the system can see all records of the object, and there is no need for having an object to track the sharing. Similarly, if the object is on a detail side of a master detail relationship, again the sharing is controlled by the master, the parent record, and the detail object won't have the corresponding share object. So whenever we are receiving such errors, the place to look at is OWD. And when we want to use Apex managed sharing, we should be having the modify all data permission. Mostly system admins will have it. And if we are writing the Apex code, and when we are inserting or deleting the Apex managed sharing records, we should be having the modify all data permission to proceed forward. And the naming convention is different for standard objects and custom objects. When you take standard objects like account contact opportunity, it will have the share object in the naming convention like object name followed by share, like account share or an opportunity share. However, if it is a custom object, say we have a custom object called invoice and the API name of the invoice object will be invoice double underscore C. So if you check the backend of the invoice object, the corresponding share will be having the naming convention like object name followed by share like invoice double underscore share or employee double underscore share. Next up are the fields. So each and every share object that we just discussed will have set of fields associated to it. By modifying the values of this field, we will be setting up the configuration of each and every share record. So these four fields are the predominant fields where we have the parent ID. This always should be the record ID for which we are sharing the access. And this can be modified. I mean, this can be given only during the record creation, the share record creation, and it cannot be updated once it is inserted. And when it comes to access level, we can either provide read access or edit access through Apex managed sharing. However, we will not be able to provide the full access, which means, say, if a record is owned by a user, he has full access on the record. In other words, it is called as the all access, and the all access is not available when we are using Apex managed sharing. So we will be either providing read access or edit access to records. And user or group ID is a polymorphic field. Like these are the target set of users for which we are providing access. So we can either provide it to a user or we can provide it to a group object record. Say, for example, we want to share records with roles or roles and subordinates or to territories. Each and every role or role and territory, roles and subordinates and territory will have a corresponding record in the group object. So this user or group ID is a polymorphic field which can point to user record or to a group record. And row cost, this is a very important field as far as the sharing behavior is concerned, because when we insert a Apex managed sharing record, row cost by default will be having the value as manual. However, we can modify it with the help of Apex sharing reasons. Yep. So Apex sharing reasons, it is available only for custom objects and it is available only in Classic. And there is a very important reason for using this particular feature. Let's think of this particular scenario. We have a business requirement by which we need to share records with maybe a set of users, maybe set of 30 users, and only for a period of say 6 months. And we want to keep a track of it because at the end of 6 months, we have to revisit this and we may have to either modify or delete depending upon say we have an internal audit coming up. And just before the audit, we want to ensure that there is no uh, permanent access given to the records. So through Apex sharing reason, it will be very helpful as far as the maintenance activity is concerned. And each custom object can have n number of sharing reasons, and a single record can be shared to a same user through different sharing reasons. Say, for example, I want to share a particular record to a particular user for maybe for follow-up purpose and for some other business functionalities. So we will create the Apex sharing reasons accordingly. So let's check it out in the org. So we have the invoice custom object here, and we have Apex sharing reasons. Say we have a business requirement by which we need to share the records for follow-up purpose, right? So what we will do, we'll go to the invoice custom object, we'll go to Apex sharing reasons and create a record for follow-up user edit access. And it's always a best practice to keep the name of this similar to what is the actual requirement, so that when we are revisiting this maybe after some time, we will be easily identifying what is the Apex sharing reason for which we provided access to group of users. Right, so we will be discussing a couple of use cases in this demo. And for that, we have two custom objects set up in the demo arc. We have invoice custom object and we have employee custom object. So invoice custom object has a few custom fields like cost, description. It looks up to the employee object through the employee lookup field and the status field as well. And it also looks up to the user standard object through the follow-up username. And as far as the employee custom object is concerned, it tracks information like the employee ID, name, joining date, designation, email, and all. So this is the schema that we have. It's a very simple schema to make things very clear. And we will discuss a couple of use cases with this schema. Right. So the first scenario that we have on our hand is to share the related records dynamically. So just a recap, we have two objects, invoice and employee, and the OWD of both the custom objects is private, and invoice object is the child object and it looks up to the employee custom object through a lookup relationship. Also, it looks up to the user standard object through the follow-up user field. And the scenario we have in our hand is whenever an invoice record is created or whenever it is modified, and if the invoice record has a follow-up user field associated to it, we should be providing edit access to the follow-up user for the invoice record as well as for the employee record. So when we have the scenario in hand, what we will do is we'll start with the declarative features. Say whether it is possible to achieve this through OWD. No, because we have OWD as private. Then whether setting up role hierarchy can help. No, because we have some related records to share and it is also dynamic in nature. Then we will check the sharing rules, criteria or ownership based sharing rules. We can write sharing rules on the object. We can check the fields on that. We can share it with the roles and subordinates. However, our particular use case deals with sharing related records as well. So sharing rules and manual sharing won't help here. So because of all these considerations, we will be going for the Apex managed sharing. With that, let's check the code once. Right. So we have a simple trigger written on the invoice object and it fires on insert and update. During insert, we will see whether the follow-up user field is populated or not, because this is the user for which we are providing access to. So it's mandatory to perform this null check over here. So during insert, we will check whether the follow-up user is populated. If so, we are capturing them in a map. And for update, we need to check one more condition. A condition being whether the follow-up user is changed or not. So if you are changing from user A to user B, we need to provide access to user B, and at the same time, we need to remove access from user A. So for that, we will capture this in two separate maps, for one for the old follow-up user and one for the current user. Once we have all the data that we want to iterate over, we will be providing that to the trigger handler class, within which we will be creating the share records. So as per our scenario, we need to create share records for both invoice and for employee, and we need to provide edit access. And for that, we have already created the sharing reasons in invoice as well as employee. So what we will do, we'll create invoice share with the parent ID, which is nothing but the invoice ID record that we are iterating over. We'll provide edit access. This is where things are dynamic. So previously, if you consider all the declarative features, it will be based on a field value. And here we need to check a particular user, and depending upon that, we need to provide access to not only the invoice record, but also to the associated employee record. And this is the way of getting the row cause on the Apex. Like we will use the schema class, then we use the object name, which is invoice double underscore share or employee double underscore share for these objects. Then row cause followed by the API name of sharing reason. So we created a sharing reason in the org, right? For that we have a label and a reason name. We will use this reason name in the Apex. Once we insert the records, so the user who was marked as a follow-up user on the invoice level will get edit access on invoice as well as employee. And when it comes to the update scenario, we have to delete the share records that we provided for the old follow-up user. Since it is not quite a straightforward way of identifying the exact share records, we may have to do a concatenation here. So if you see this particular statement, what it is doing is it is taking the invoice ID and the follow-up user given on the invoice level and putting it into a unique string. So this unique string is a concatenation of the invoice ID and the follow-up user. So once the concatenated string is available, we will query the corresponding share objects, be it invoice share or employee share. And when there is a match between this concatenated ID and the share record, we have identified the exact share record that we want to delete. In this case, invoice share as well as employee share. So once we do this, the old user will lose access. So let's check how it works on the org. Let's create an invoice. What shall we give here? I have been planning to purchase maybe a noise cancellation headphone, which may be helpful. Due date not in June, at least in 2020. Let's make it July. Employee is a mandatory field. Let's choose test 2. Status new. My budget is 3K. Let's choose a follow-up user. So whenever we choose a follow-up user, so this follow-up, say I am choosing test user 2, test user 2 should get edit access on both invoice record as well as the employee record. Let's test that out. So we have logged in as the test user 2 and see we have edit access on this invoice record. We'll make some changes, maybe put the due date and save it. Yeah, we are able to save the invoice record, which means we have the edit access on it. Similarly, we'll test it out for the associated employee as well. SD1. Yes, there you go. So we are able to provide edit access for both the objects for invoice as well as employee for the user who is chosen as a follow-up user. So this covers our first use case. And the next one is related to creating manual share records on bulk. And the catch here is we need to check the criteria from the related records. Again, we will start with the declarative features first. We'll see whether OWD is possible. No, we are going to create manual share records. And even in manual share, consider we have to check all the criteria from the related object. So it becomes practically impossible to open each and every record in the UI and create manual sharing records to the corresponding users. So our approach is to use Apex managed sharing for this as well. And we have a batch class for it. Let me quickly run through this batch class. Yeah, it has a start method, which gets the corresponding query, which will check what are all the criteria in the invoice record, which needs to be satisfied. And we are not hard coding anything over here in terms of query. And Johan, any thoughts on hard coding the queries or user IDs in the code?
I'm not speaking to that.
Fine. So I think Johan is not a big fan of hard coding as well, like me. So what we have done is we have used custom settings for it. Yeah, we have a custom setting where we have configured the user ID for which we need to provide access. And this is the query which will run and identify whether any invoice records is there which satisfy this particular condition. So going through the code, so the start method will take the query configured in the custom settings and it will issue a query and find out the satisfying invoice records. And in the execute method, we are iterating over the invoice records and creating the share. So we are going to provide read access as the access level. Parent ID is the invoice ID for which you are providing access. And here again, we have configured the user in the custom settings and we are just retrieving it over here. And we have to focus on this particular line, right? So if we are creating Apex managed sharing records, manual is the default row cause. So we can even ignore this line. But what I wanted to highlight is whenever we are creating any share records with row cause as manual, and if the owner of the corresponding invoice changes, users who get access with the help of row cause as manual will lose access. So that is one of the major consideration of using row cause as manual. So what we'll do, we'll insert the invoice shares and we will test this batch class here. Database.execute batch manual share. So it looks like we have an error, maybe with respect to query configuration, maybe.
There's a missing apostrophe at the end.
Exactly. In STA2, there is a mismatch. Exactly. Yep. Right. Let's rerun it. No error so far. We'll check any records are there with respect to this particular criteria. Yeah, we have certain employees. No invoices at this moment. Okay, let's create one. So as per the batch class, we need to provide access to this user, which is test user 2. Let's rerun the batch once. Let's give it some time. Let's verify it in the query level first. Right. Let's verify in the UI. There you go. So what we have done is In the batch class, we are querying for the employee records whose designation is STE2, and for the related invoice, we have provided read access to this configured user. So we're able to achieve this particular use case through Apex Managed Sharing. And to summarize, whenever we receive any sharing related use case, we'll start with the declarative features and we will see the considerations. And if the features are not possible, and if there is a trade-off as far as performance is concerned, then we will consider Apex Managed Sharing, which will create share records programmatically. And Apex sharing reason, it is available only for custom objects, and we can create multiple sharing reasons for a single custom object. And with share records, we can provide read or edit access to single user, group of users, roles, territories, public groups, roles and subordinates as well. And we can access the Apex sharing reason in the code level with the help of the schema classes. And one important consideration as far as the row cause is concerned, whenever we use manual as the row cause and if there is a ownership change, the records which are manually shared to users, such users will lose access to the records as well. So that is the consideration as far as manual is concerned. Also, as a takeaway, I would like to ask you to try out this particular use case where you can have a custom object like invoice. You can create a test, a kind of a lookup field called profile, and you can populate it. And whenever a profile is populated, all the users who belong to the particular profile should get edit access on invoice and its related records. This particular use case, you can try it out. And if you face any challenges, you can reach out to us again. And with that, I believe I have covered all the topics with respect to Apex Managed Sharing, whatever we planned. And I believe it's good to hand it over to Diana.
Hello, and I am back. Hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. So shortly we will be we're giving Giuseppe a couple of seconds to get set up. I did notice that there were some questions during Kiran's presentation. So we'll be responding to those in the YouTube post because we do want to make sure that we give everybody the time to talk and then keep the webinar to about the hour that we had talked about to begin with. So let me get Giuseppe over here. As a presenter. And he is now the host. And there we go. Welcome, Giuseppe.
Thank you so much, Diana. And let me share my screen. Share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So hi, everyone. Today, I'd like to talk about the real-life scenario that I had to face last year, and I'm still improving it over time. It's about a scalable near real-time integration between Salesforce and several external systems. And let me go through the agenda. So we first go through a context. I will give you, like in a review board, I will give you the environment where this has happened, an introduction on the company and the constraints. We will then go through the low code and low cost technical solution that I have implemented. I will show you a revised version of that as I would present it in a review board. And since we have this super cool new feature that is coming soon on Evergreen, I will show you how my first low code and low cost scenario could change thanks to Evergreen in the future. For the moment, it's still on beta, but I hope to play with it soon. The key message I have for you on this presentation is, in designing your solutions, keep the balance between best practices and real-life constraints. So let's start. Diana already introduced me. If you want to get in touch, I have my Twitter handler on this slide, so don't hesitate to write me. The messages should be open. Just let me know if not. So the context. Acrotech use case scenario. I work at Acrotech. Acrotech is a group, a Swiss manufacturing group with 3 main divisions and in total 20 different companies. This manufacturing group operates mainly on watchmaking, precision high-tech, and medtech. As you can imagine, the business processes are quite different and quite diverse in time. The sales process is different, but in the end, they are all manufacturing process about very high precise stuff. The group has grown a lot in the past few years. So you see the need of scalability because in the past few years, several companies have been acquired. And so I needed something that scaled well. But at the same time, on the technical side, I had the following constraints. We have a single Salesforce org for all the subsidiaries of the group, about 90 users. Most of the objects are private because we want users to collaborate between the different companies. Some companies are complementary to each other. They offer services which could be proposed as a unique package to the customers, but some others, they are competitors to each other. So we need the data to be segregated well. And most of the objects are private with a OWD set as private and some sharing setting to publish the records at company level. We have a very limited amount of IT resources. In the best cases, we have 1 to 2 people, and it's mainly on first level of IT support and infrastructure, not really developers. And sometimes we only rely on external providers. So most of the employees of these 20 companies are in the production, in manufacturing part. At the group level, we have no on-premise infrastructure. And since we spend a huge amount of money on high precision machines, the budget for IT.
Sorry, just a minute. Siva, can you please mute yourself? You can hear your background noise. Or Giuseppe, maybe you can mute Siva. And otherwise it will be on YouTube forever.
Exactly. Let me mute all.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. Can you still hear me? Yes, I think so. Okay. So as I said, we have a limited IT budget because the machines are $1 million machines. So the money they prefer to spend money on the quality of the products than on IT. And these 20 companies had very old niche market ERP systems, not really mainstream systems. So you cannot really find the pre-made connectors for Salesforce. So this was the context I had when I joined the project. And the first thing I've seen when I joined the project has been this. So how many of you can relate to this sentence? Raise your hand if you had something like that. Your customers asking asking to have their Salesforce data automatically transferred and appear in the ERP system in real time. I guess this is quite a common scenario. And the first thing that you do as an architect when you receive such a requirement is to challenge it. So why do you need it? Because real time is complex, real time is expensive. And in their case, they had a good reason for that because they received most of the requests for quotes on their Outlook. They wanted to create directly the opportunities from Outlook integration. And then they had to immediately run to the ERP system and repeat the same information to be able to price the product correctly, because in the ERP system, they had some complex calculation on the materials and the feasibility of the product. So it didn't make sense to reproduce all the 20 different complex calculations in Salesforce. So at least I had to try to find a solution for providing the information as quickly as possible to the ERP. How many ERPs? We saw already they had more than 15 different kind of ERPs. Data volumes, we're not talking about big data. It's relatively small companies, small to medium-sized companies. 2 million records in total, I would say, for the operational data. And the data change frequency, I checked right before this meeting, and the highest change of records has been 14,000 records in a day. So it's not that much. So you start thinking, what can I do? Point to point, you exclude it immediately, because point to point means linking all the possible ERP systems and Salesforce and so on to Salesforce, and you just exclude that. Hub and spoke could be, so having a centralized repository where you store the information and you share it without them connecting to Salesforce could be, and service bus is also an option. One thing that is often overlooked is which skills do we have, because you can design the fanciest solution, but if you're not able to implement it, or if on the other hand, the ERP developers, they are not able to code a web service, as it was the case in our case, yeah, you basically can't go ahead with your project. So I thought everyone can connect to a relational database. Why don't we use Heroku Connect with an intermediate database, and the ERP systems would connect to this intermediate database and integrate the way they want with this database. This would work, but it was extremely expensive, so we didn't match on the pricing, and we went on. What shall I do? I can schedule an ETL process, but then either I consume all the API calls I have. If I check every minute, something has changed, and it's anyway not real time. Or I could have a fully fledged ESB, but that again could be expensive. So wait a minute, what's my available budget? I needed to have some answers from the management. So I turned back to the management and I asked to my business sponsor, so what's my available budget for this project? And the business sponsor came back like this, empty pockets. So basically, as an architect, what you would do is to try to figure out a solution and make the impossible possible. So here's my low code and low budget solution. I really want you to keep in mind in designing your solution, keep the balance between best practices and real life constraints. And you've seen which constraints I'm talking about. So here's the high level architecture of the currently implemented solution. This is only for the real time from Salesforce to the ERP through a shared database. So on the top left, you see that the user is creating or updating a record on Salesforce. There is a workflow which is triggered based on some criteria which are defined by the admin. So the cool thing there is that the admin can decide when the integration takes place. And this is quite flexible without coding anything. Then there is an outbound message which is sent to AWS, which I use here as a messaging handling platform. So it's kind of an ESB, but it's built combining different services on AWS. The advantage of that is that it's serverless. We don't have fixed costs to pay upfront for the servers, and it's pay-per-use. So if we don't have many transactions on a given day, or yeah, if we don't do any change on a given day, we don't pay anything. And if we change something, we pay for a few fraction of cents for each transaction. The out-of-the-box features from AWS are also quite cool, because you can configure the security at very high level. For example, you can restrict IP addresses, you can implement your own authentication, and you have integrated monitoring, which is automatically done out of the box for every AWS service. So this messaging handling is storing the change data into this intermediate database. Why did I choose Postgre? Not only because of Ruth for the architects, but also because Postgre is a free database which provides row-level security policies. What does it mean? It means that you can basically replicate the same private organization-wide defaults that you have in Salesforce on the database. So I can create a user for each different ERP system, and they only see the rows of a table that are belonging to their system, not anything else. Because on every private object, there is one field, which is basically a code identifying the system. And they only have access to the rows having this field. Conceptually, we use Amazon RDS, so I could have put everything on AWS in the AWS box. But during the Dreamforce presentation, I was using Heroku free Postgre for 10,000 records. So conceptually, it can be any Postgre database everywhere. So I kept it separate on the diagram. This change data is then collected by the different ERP systems in different ways. And some of them have implemented DB links. So they created virtual tables directly integrated with the tables from this database. Some others, they have scheduled jobs with the possibility for the user to pull, to request an update, manual synchronization from the UI. This I let the freedom to every single ERP to implement it the way they wanted. And once they created the record in the ERP systems or updated the record, they would return the external ERP ID into the database, which I'm then collecting through another process, which I'm not displaying on this presentation. If we go a bit more in detail, let's see the different services that are combined in this AWS box. So the outbound messages are sent to Amazon API Gateway. This is basically an API management service where you can define the different endpoints for your API and what happens whenever they send the message to a specific endpoint. There are different versioning, so you can define different versions of your API, and based on that, you have a different process. And you can define the API once and deploy it in different environments. So you might have the same rule with dynamically routing on production and test environment based on some environmental variable that you specify in the configuration of the deployment and not at the API level. What's the concern there on API Gateway? API Gateway is designed for REST and WebSocket services, and outbound messages are SOAP messages. So how did I solve this constraint? If you think about the technology itself, SOAP is nothing more than an XML, which is sent over a transportation layer, which in this case is HTTP. So in the end, it's like a REST service with a XML payload containing the XML itself, so the message itself, plus some additional tags to identify this is a SOAP message, you need to read it like that, and this is the schema of the message. In the end, I just needed to parse this XML. So what I did is I wrapped the XML into a string, and then I store this XML with the escaped quotes into a different queue. So for every object that I needed to integrate, I created a queue for every object and environment that I needed to integrate. I created a different queue in Amazon SQS. So Amazon SQS is a queue system where you can basically pass any message in JSON. And I just passed a message with a single JSON field containing the whole XML message. The cool thing is that Salesforce is automatically bulkifying all your data. So if you make 1,000 different changes at the same time through a bulk update, Salesforce is automatically grouping the changes in groups of 100. So it's sending only one message per 100 records. This reduces a lot the processing time, and you have everything bulkified through the whole pipe. Once a message is in a queue, you can define to run a service, like a serverless compute service, which in Amazon is called AWS Lambda. So for every new message, as soon as it entered the queue, I had a Lambda receiving the information. And if for any reason I need to stop the Lambda because there is some issue, I can remove the trigger at this level, and the messages will still be in the queue, and they will be processed as soon as I put it back. Why I didn't choose to run a Lambda directly from API Gateway, despite it's possible. So you can technically run a Lambda function directly from API Gateway. The reason is outbound messages are, they have an automatic resend mechanism, which is cool, because if Amazon API Gateway for any reason should be down, I doubt it will ever be down because it's automatically scaling and it's automatically redundant. But for whatever reason, if there is an issue at this level, Salesforce will automatically try to resend the message for 24 hours. Unless you respond with an XML acknowledging that you received the message. So this thing, to avoid receiving the message several times, this needs to be happening as quick as possible. And that's why I write the message to the queue and I immediately reply. Then I don't care how long it takes to run this part. So this is kind of decoupling and gaining flexibility also on how you want to route your messages and how you want to handle your messages. The AWS Lambda are functions that are different for every single object, of course. I need to parse different XMLs with different fields. And you can develop your own Lambdas in Java, in Python, Ruby, Node.js. There are several languages which are supported. I'm not a senior developer, and I wanted to keep it also low code, not only low cost. So what I used is a software called Talend Open Studio for data integration. And this software is basically generating Java code, but from a graphical, you design basically your ETL process as a graphical tool. You do the mapping of the fields and the parsing of the XML in a graphical way, and then it generates an executable jar that you can run through a Lambda. You need to just put it in a Java function and it works. The processes that you see here on top, they are for every service in AWS. You have CloudWatch, which is basically the monitoring tool from AWS. Everything on AWS is monitored through CloudWatch. You can create your own dashboards, your own alerts. If it takes too much time to reply from API Gateway, or if the messages in the queue are over a certain threshold, you can get alerts by email. And the S3 service is a storage service where you store basically your Java applications. So these are side services that are to support the main pipeline here below. So this Lambda function is upserting the messages to Postgre, and then every single ERP system is connecting to this Postgre database. Just to show you quickly how what does it look like in Talend. So you open the connection, you receive the message from SQS, you parse the XML. I added this. You need to filter the org ID, which is included in the message, so you know that the message is not sent to the wrong system. If it's for production, it will go to production. If it's for UAT, it will go to UAT sandbox. It's always good to have some gating of the messages. And this is where the magic mapping happens. I discovered that it was more performant to split the inserts and update instead of using upsert, but this is technically possible to just have an upsert. And then at the end, I close the connection. This is something I learned while creating the demo for the Reinforce, because I was using the free version of Postgre, and they have a limited amount of open connection that you can leave. So if you use too much, it doesn't allow you to connect anymore. In general, when you leave the connection open after a certain time, it drops, but it's best practice to close it. So I'm doing that. So just for the parsing, this is how it happens. You just provide the XPath and the location, and for every field, this is the most tedious part, where you need to map every single field that you want to integrate. And then you can do your transformations. In this case, I just replicated the same data model as it was, so there is no transformation, but technically you can do any ETL transformation or cleanup of data in this. So what about costs? I'm sure you are curious, and it costs less than $120 per month, which is not much considering an ESB or any commercial ESB on the market. Basically, it's like 2% of the cost. Now I want to show you how I would presented this in a CTA review board, also known as unlimited budget. So it's exactly the opposite of the situation I had. In a CTA review board, you don't need to go to this level of detail. You can just say that there is a middleware, an ESB, that is orchestrating the integration, and you can send a call out to this ESB, providing some service on this side, and the different ERP systems will be connected either to the database as well, or to the ESB itself. It depends on the capabilities of the system, but basically it would be much simpler to explain in a CTA review board, and you don't need that level of detail. On the Evergreen side, would it be low code, low budget? We don't know yet, because it's not generally available yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to playing with it. Just for those who never heard about Evergreen, it's basically kind of a Lambda, AWS Lambda integrated into Salesforce running on Heroku infrastructure. So you can call it from change data capture event. You can link it to platform events, Lightning Web Components, Flow Builder, and Apex. And it's possible to create code in Java, Node.js, and Apex. But technically, as it's running on Heroku, I suspect there will be the possibility to create your own build packs, so you can integrate any other language. Basically, it's based on Kubernetes, and you can run any machine that you want. And they also simplify the way to connect to managed data stores on Heroku. Postgre, Redis for in-memory database, and Kafka for a queuing system and messaging system. You can also connect to external HTTP requests. This QR code is just pointing to a developer blog where it explains a bit more in detail what Evergreen is. And this would be the solution, the same solution as I did, but running on Evergreen. So it's similar to what we have for the ESB. We are still within the Salesforce infrastructure. So there is a system within the system, let's say. and we call the Evergreen function, and we get an async response. I assume, since we can develop in Java, that I could also create the same Talend jobs and let them run on this. But I'm also studying Node.js just in case. And then you can synchronize it with the database and get the different ERP systems to connect. So now some homeworks, optional of course, but now it's your turn. You can adapt the presentation, and you can follow a step-by-step guide on how to implement the initial architecture that I did. It's a 5 pages long post with all the screenshots of how to set it up on your end, and it's on my blog. You can use this QR code or just go to this address. And of course, always remember to in designing your solution to keep the balance between best practices and real life constraints. I thank you very much, and I give back the host to Diana. Stop sharing. Where is Diana? Make host. There she is.
Thank you so much. It takes a minute to find us, doesn't it, to give that host back? Let me share my screen again. I just want to say thank you so much, Kiran and Giuseppe, for your presentations today. And thank everyone for joining us today. So I just wanted to let everybody know we've hit that hour mark, so we're pretty close to being right on the expectation that we set. The slides and recordings will be shared after the meeting on LinkedIn, and the recording will be on YouTube. And any topics that you would like to hear from us in the future, please let us know, and we'll make sure that we post the next topics coming up. But I just want to say thank you so much. If anybody is interested in being a presenter for next time, please reach out, or a host. And this concludes our second session of SAIMA. Thank you and happy trails. Have a great day, evening, night, wherever you're located.